Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his hoverbike through the rocky canyons of Kepler 442b. The red dust kicked up behind him like the old trails back on Earth, but here the gravity was lighter and the twin suns cast everything in an orange glow. He'd been tracking cattle rustlers for 3 days now, following energy signatures and broken vegetation through this maze of stone. The settlement of New Tombstone relied on him to keep their livestock safe. As the only peace officer for 100 miles, Jake took his job seriously. The colonists had chosen this frontier world because it reminded them of the American Southwest, complete with mesas, canyons, and vast open spaces perfect for ranching. What they hadn't expected were the local predators and the occasional band of criminals who saw the isolated farms as easy targets. Jake's scanner beeped softly, picking up unusual energy readings ahead. He slowed the hoverbike and dismounted, drawing his plasma revolver from its holster. The weapon was a custom job, built to look like his great-grandfather's Colt .45, but packed with enough firepower to drop a charging razorback. He moved carefully between the red rocks, following the signal. The sound hit him first, high-pitched squealing that made his teeth ache, coming from somewhere up ahead. Jake had heard that sound before, but not from any Earth animal. He crept forward and peered around a boulder, then stopped dead in his tracks. 3 alien creatures huddled in a cage made of energy bars, their scales shimmering between blue and purple in the strange light. They looked like baby dragons from the old stories, about the size of house cats, but with membranous wings folded against their backs. Their eyes were large and intelligent, filled with terror as they pressed against each other. Around the cage, 5 figures in environmental suits worked to load equipment into a sleek black ship. Jake recognized the design. Hegemony smugglers, the worst kind of scum in this part of the galaxy. They dealt in exotic creatures, selling them to collectors who didn't care about things like sentience or conservation. "Hurry up with those specimens," one of the smugglers barked through his suit's speaker. "Command wants them delivered to the research station before they mature. Once they hit adolescence, they become too dangerous to handle." Jake's blood ran cold. Research station meant experimentation, probably vivisection. These creatures would be tortured in the name of science, their unique biology studied until they died on some laboratory table. He'd seen the reports from other worlds where the hegemony had operated. They left nothing but empty ecosystems behind them. The cowboy checked his weapon's charge and counted his targets. 5 against 1 weren't great odds, but he'd faced worse. The smugglers were focused on their work, not watching for threats. Jake could use that. He moved to a better position, keeping low behind the rocks. The Dragonlings sensed something and turned their large eyes toward his hiding spot. One of them, slightly larger than the others, tilted its head and made a soft, chirping sound. Jake put a finger to his lips, hoping the universal gesture would translate. The largest smuggler, apparently the leader, activated a control pad. The energy cage contracted, forcing the Dragonlings closer together. They cried out in distress, and Jake saw red. He'd grown up on stories of cowboys protecting the innocent, of standing up to bullies regardless of the odds. These aliens might not be human, but they were clearly suffering, and that was enough. Jake stood up and called out, "Kepler Peace Authority! Release those creatures and step away from the ship!" The smugglers spun around, reaching for their weapons. Jake was faster. His plasma revolver hummed to life, and he put a shot through the leader's shoulder before the man could draw. The alien spun and dropped, clutching his wounded arm. "The next one goes through someone's head," Jake announced, keeping his weapon trained on the group. "I suggest you folks reconsider your career choices." The remaining smugglers exchanged glances. Jake could see them calculating odds, weighing their options. Professional criminals always did that dance, trying to figure out if they could take him. "You're just one man," the second-in-command said, a woman with scarred hands and cold eyes. "We've got you outnumbered." "Maybe," Jake replied, not moving his aim. "But I'm the one with the gun pointed at your boss. How much is he paying you? Enough to die for?" The woman's hand twitched toward her weapon. Jake shifted his aim to her chest. "I wouldn't, ma'am. I've got a reputation for being fast on the draw." For a moment, nobody moved. The Dragonlings watched from their cage, silent now, but alert. The twin suns beat down on the canyon, and the only sound was the hum of the ship's engines. Then the woman went for her gun. Jake's plasma bolt took her center mass, and she dropped without a sound. The other three smugglers stumbled backward, hands raised. Sometimes a demonstration of skill was the only language criminals understood. "Smart choice," Jake said, advancing slowly. "Now deactivate that cage and step away from the ship." The wounded leader struggled to his feet, pressing one hand against his bleeding shoulder. "You don't understand what you're interfering with, human. These specimens are worth more than your entire pathetic colony. The hegemony will hunt you to the ends of space for this." "Let them come," Jake replied. "I've dealt with bullies before." He motioned with his gun toward the cage controls. "Turn it off, now." Reluctantly, the leader touched his control pad. The energy bars flickered and disappeared, and the Dragonlings tumbled out onto the rocky ground. They stayed huddled together, watching the humans with wary eyes. Jake kept his weapon trained on the smugglers while he backed toward the creatures. "Easy there, little ones," he said softly. "Nobody's going to hurt you now." The largest Dragonling, the one who had spotted him earlier, approached cautiously. It sniffed at Jake's outstretched hand, then rubbed its scaled head against his palm like a cat seeking affection. The touch sent a strange tingling through Jake's fingers, and for just a moment he could have sworn he felt something else, a presence touching the edges of his mind. The other two Dragonlings joined their companion, pressing against Jake's legs with surprising trust. Their scales felt warm despite their reptilian appearance, and they made soft, trilling sounds that seemed almost like purring. "Impossible," the wounded smuggler breathed. "They've never shown trust toward any other species. Our xenobiologists spent months trying to establish contact." Jake looked down at the creatures clinging to him. "Maybe your scientists weren't asking nicely." That's when things went wrong. The ship's engines suddenly roared to life, and Jake realized he'd made a mistake. There had been a fifth smuggler, still aboard the vessel. The man appeared in the cargo bay doorway, holding what looked like a sonic disruptor. "Let them go, Cowboy, or I'll bring this whole canyon down on your head." Jake started to raise his weapon, but the Dragonlings moved faster. The largest one spread its wings and launched itself into the air, followed by its companions. They moved with impossible speed and coordination, their small bodies darting around the sonic weapon's beam. The smuggler tried to track them, but they were too quick, too agile. While he was distracted, Jake put a plasma bolt through the disruptor's power cell. The weapon exploded in the man's hands, sending him tumbling back into the ship. But the damage was done. The sonic pulse had destabilized the canyon walls. Cracks appeared in the red stone above them, and Jake could hear the ominous rumble of an impending rock slide. "Move!" he shouted, grabbing the wounded leader and dragging him away from the ship. The other smugglers needed no encouragement, scrambling for safety as chunks of stone began to fall. The Dragonlings dove toward Jake, their wing beats surprisingly powerful for such small creatures. The largest one landed on his shoulder while its companions circled overhead, chirping urgently. Jake felt that strange mental touch again, stronger this time, and suddenly he understood. They were trying to warn him about something else. Jake looked up and saw it. A massive boulder, easily 10 tons, teetering on the edge of the canyon rim directly above them. The sonic pulse had loosened it, and it was about to fall right on their position. There was nowhere to run. The canyon floor was too narrow, and the falling rocks blocked the exits. Jake closed his eyes and pulled the Dragonlings against his chest, hoping to shield them from the impact. That's when the impossible happened. The Dragonlings began to glow with an inner light, their scales shifting from blue-purple to brilliant gold. The glow spread to Jake, covering him in the same radiance. He felt a surge of energy unlike anything he'd ever experienced, as if lightning was running through his veins. The boulder struck the energy field around them and shattered like glass. Smaller rocks bounced harmlessly off the barrier, and the dust cloud parted around them as if blown by an invisible wind. When the rock slide ended, Jake stood in a circle of clear ground, while debris lay scattered around them. The glow faded from the Dragonlings, leaving them looking exhausted but unharmed. They clung to him weakly, their large eyes drooping with fatigue. "What the hell are you?" the wounded smuggler whispered, staring at Jake with newfound fear. Jake didn't have an answer. He looked down at the creatures in his arms, feeling their trust and something else. A connection he couldn't explain. Whatever had just happened, it had changed something fundamental between them. The remaining smugglers huddled together, no longer thinking about resistance. Their ship was buried under tons of rock, their leader was injured, and they'd just witnessed something that defied everything they thought they knew about the universe. "Here's what's going to happen," Jake said, his voice carrying a strange resonance that hadn't been there before. "You're going to walk out of this canyon and never come back to this world. You're going to tell your hegemony friends that Kepler 442b is under the protection of the Terran Colonial Authority, and that includes all native life forms." "You can't protect an entire planet," one of the smugglers protested. "The hegemony has fleets, armies. You're just one man." Jake looked down at the Dragonlings, who were watching him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. He thought about the energy field, about the mental connection he'd felt, about the trust these creatures had shown him despite having every reason to fear humans. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not alone anymore." The smuggler leader struggled to his feet, still clutching his wounded arm. "This isn't over, human. The hegemony will return with a full expedition. These creatures are too valuable to abandon." "Then I'll be waiting for them," Jake replied. He activated his comm unit and called for backup, knowing it would be hours before any help arrived. But somehow he wasn't worried anymore. As the smugglers disappeared into the canyon maze, Jake sat down on a flat rock and gently stroked the Dragonling's scales. They had curled up against him like sleeping cats, their breathing slow and peaceful. He thought about what the smuggler had said about research stations and mature Dragonlings being too dangerous to handle. Looking at these small, trusting creatures, Jake couldn't imagine them being dangerous to anyone. But then again, he'd thought they were just simple animals until they'd saved his life with some kind of energy field. The largest Dragonling opened one eye and looked up at him. For a moment, Jake felt that mental touch again, fainter than before, but still there. Images flashed through his mind, vast flocks of Dragonlings soaring through alien skies, complex structures built into mountainsides, and something else that made his heart race. A cry for help, broadcast across the stars. A species on the edge of extinction, their young stolen by poachers, while the adults died defending their remaining nests. Jake's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. He'd signed up to protect a human colony, not to wage war against an interstellar criminal organization. But looking down at the small creatures who had chosen to trust him, he knew his job description had just gotten a lot more complicated. The comm unit crackled to life. "Jake, this is Sheriff Martinez. We picked up some kind of explosion on the scanner. What's your status?" Jake looked around at the rock slide, the buried smuggler ship, and the three alien creatures sleeping peacefully in his lap. He thought about energy fields and mental connections and hegemony research stations. "I found those cattle rustlers, Maria," he said into the comm, "but I think we might have a bigger problem than missing livestock." "How much bigger?" Jake stroked the Dragonling's scales and felt their absolute trust in him, their certainty that he would keep them safe no matter what came next. "The kind that might require calling Earth for reinforcements." Sheriff Maria Martinez arrived with 2 deputies just as the twin suns were setting behind the canyon walls. She took one look at the rock slide, the scattered smuggler equipment, and the 3 small creatures curled up against Jake's chest, and her weathered face went pale. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," she whispered. "Jake, please tell me those aren't what I think they are." "Depends on what you think they are," Jake replied, gently stroking the largest Dragonling's scales. The creature stirred in his arms but didn't wake up. All 3 had been sleeping for hours, exhausted from whatever they'd done to save his life. Maria's deputy, Tom Chen, was scanning the area with his handheld detector. "Sheriff, I'm reading massive energy residue here. Whatever happened, it was big enough to register on satellites." The other deputy, Sarah Blackwood, was examining the remains of the smuggler's ship. "Hegemony design," she called out. "Military-grade shielding, high-end sensor array. This wasn't some random poaching operation." Maria knelt down next to Jake, studying the sleeping Dragonlings with a mixture of wonder and worry. "The colonists have been reporting strange sightings for months. Flying creatures in the mountains, sounds like whale songs echoing through the canyons. We thought they were just local wildlife." "They are local wildlife," Jake said, "but not the kind we can ignore." He told them everything: the mental connection, the energy field, the images that had flashed through his mind. Maria listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "Jake, if these creatures are sentient, if they can do what you're describing, then we're looking at a first contact situation. This goes way beyond our jurisdiction." "The hegemony doesn't care about jurisdiction," Tom said, joining the conversation. "I've been tracking their operations for years. They take what they want and worry about legal consequences later." Sarah held up a damaged data pad she'd pulled from the wreckage. "I might be able to salvage some intel from this. If we're lucky, we could learn more about their operation." Jake felt one of the Dragonlings stir against his chest. The smallest one opened its eyes and looked up at him with an expression that seemed almost human in its intelligence. The mental connection was faint but still there, like a whisper at the edge of his consciousness. "They're waking up," he said softly. All 3 creatures began to rouse, stretching their wings and looking around at the new arrivals. They showed no fear of the other humans, but they stayed close to Jake, pressing against him for comfort. Maria reached out slowly, offering her hand to the largest Dragonling. It sniffed cautiously, then allowed her to scratch under its chin. "My God, they're beautiful. Look at those eyes. There's definitely intelligence there." The Dragonling made a soft trilling sound and nuzzled against Maria's hand. Tom and Sarah moved closer, both fascinated by the creature's obvious friendliness. "So what do we do now?" Tom asked. "We can't exactly file a standard report about this." Before anyone could answer, Jake's comm unit erupted with an urgent signal. The voice that came through was Colonel Patricia Hayes, commanding officer of the Kepler 442B Colonial Defense Force. "All units, we have multiple bogies incoming from high orbit. Unknown ships, military configuration. ETA 15 minutes to New Tombstone. This is not a drill." Jake and Maria exchanged grim looks. The hegemony had moved faster than anyone expected. "Colonel Hayes, this is Sheriff Martinez," Maria responded. "We may have intel on those incoming ships. Request immediate extraction for priority assets." "Negative, Sheriff. All aircraft are scrambled for defense. You'll have to reach the spaceport on your own." "What's the nature of these priority assets?" Jake took the comm unit. "Colonel, this is Peace Officer Morrison. We have 3 sentient alien life forms that appear to be the target of a hegemony extraction operation. These creatures have demonstrated advanced capabilities and may be critical to planetary security." There was a long pause. "Morrison, are you telling me we're looking at a first contact situation?" "Yes, ma'am. And the hegemony wants these creatures badly enough to risk open conflict with a Terran colony." "Understood. Get those creatures to the spaceport. We'll hold off the attack as long as possible, but if they're specifically after your location, you need to move now." The comm went dead, leaving the 5 humans and 3 Dragonlings alone in the gathering darkness. "The spaceport's 50 miles through open country," Sarah said. "If they know the creatures are here, they'll be watching every route." Jake stood up, cradling the Dragonlings carefully. "Then we don't take a route. We go cross-country, use the canyons for cover." "On foot? That'll take all night, assuming we don't get lost or eaten by razorbacks." "I've got a better idea," Tom said, pointing to his heavy-duty hover truck parked at the canyon mouth. "That thing's built for rough terrain. We can make it in 3 hours if we push hard." Maria nodded. "Do it. Sarah, see if you can get anything useful from that data pad. I'll coordinate with Colonial Defense. Try to get us some backup." They moved quickly, loading equipment into Tom's truck while Jake carefully secured the Dragonlings in the passenger compartment. The creatures seemed to understand the urgency, staying close together and quiet. As they prepared to leave, the largest Dragonling suddenly became agitated, chirping and flapping its wings. Jake felt the mental connection strengthen, and images flooded his mind. Ships in orbit, armed figures in environmental suits, and something that made his blood run cold. More cages, dozens of them, filled with Dragonlings of various sizes. "They've already captured more," Jake said grimly. "The ones we saved aren't the only ones." "How many?" Maria asked. Jake closed his eyes, trying to interpret the alien thoughts touching his mind. The images were fragmented, emotion-laden, but clear enough. "At least 30. Maybe more. They're being held on the lead ship." Tom started the hover truck's engine. "Then we'd better move fast. If the hegemony gets away with those creatures, we'll never see them again." They raced through the night across Kepler 442b's broken landscape. Tom pushed the truck to its limits, weaving between rock formations and jumping gullies, while Maria coordinated with Colonial Defense on the comm. The news wasn't good. 6 hegemony ships in orbit, she reported. Heavy cruisers, fully armed. "Our defense fleet is outnumbered 3-1. "What about reinforcements from Earth?" Sarah asked. 3 days minimum. The nearest Terran Navy ships are in the Alpha Centauri system." Jake felt the Dragonlings pressing against him as the truck bounced over rough terrain. They were scared, but trying to be brave, trusting him to keep them safe. The responsibility weighed on him like a physical presence. "There has to be something we can do," he said. "Some way to help the ones still captured." Sarah looked up from the salvage data pad, her face lit by its screen. "Maybe there is. I've been going through the smuggler's files, and I found something interesting. The captured Dragonlings are being held in standard containment fields, the kind designed for non-sentient animals. So, if these creatures can generate energy fields like what saved Jake's life, they might be able to overload the containment systems. But they'd need a signal, something to coordinate their efforts." Jake looked down at the largest Dragonling, which was watching him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "You understand, don't you? Your friends are still trapped up there." The creature chirped softly and touched its small clawed hand to Jake's chest. The mental connection flared, and suddenly Jake could feel them. Dozens of frightened, angry minds crying out from the ships above. The Dragonlings on the surface weren't just individuals. They were part of something larger, a community that had been torn apart by the smugglers. "They can reach the others," Jake said with growing excitement. "But they need to be closer, and they need help amplifying the signal." Tom glanced back from the driver's seat. "The communication array at the spaceport. If we could boost their natural abilities through that..." "It might work," Maria agreed. "But the hegemony will be expecting us to head for the spaceport. They'll have it under surveillance, maybe even troops on the ground." "Then we give them what they expect," Jake said. "But not how they expect it." He explained his plan as they raced through the night. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it might be their only chance to save the captured Dragonlings and protect the colony from future attacks. When they reached the outskirts of New Tombstone, they could see the spaceport in the distance, and the ominous shapes of hegemony dropships circling overhead like mechanical vultures. Ground forces had already deployed around the facility, setting up a perimeter with military precision. "There," Tom pointed to a service road that wound around behind the main terminal. "We can get close to the communication array without going through their checkpoint." They ditched the truck a mile from the spaceport and proceeded on foot, using irrigation ditches and storage buildings for cover. The Dragonlings stayed quiet, but Jake could feel their tension through the mental link. They knew their people were suffering above, and they were desperate to help. Colonial defense forces were engaged in a firefight with hegemony troops near the main terminal, providing a distraction that helped cover their approach. Energy weapons lit up the night sky, and the sound of explosions echoed across the prairie. "There's the array," Sarah whispered, pointing to a tall antenna structure behind the control tower. "But it's right in the middle of their perimeter." Jake studied the enemy positions. A dozen armored figures with heavy weapons, all focused on the main battle. But there was a gap in their coverage, a blind spot created by the tower's shadow. "I can get to it," he said, "but I'll need a distraction." "What kind of distraction?" Maria asked. Jake looked down at the Dragonlings. The largest one met his gaze and nodded, as if it understood exactly what he was thinking. "The kind only they can provide." The plan was simple, but required perfect timing. Maria and her deputies would create a diversion on the north side of the perimeter, drawing the guards' attention. Meanwhile, Jake and the Dragonlings would approach the communication array from the south. When Maria's first plasma bolt lit up a hegemony position, chaos erupted. The guards spun toward the new threat, shouting orders and returning fire. In the confusion, Jake sprinted toward the antenna tower with the Dragonlings flying alongside him. They made it halfway before someone spotted them. Energy bolts sizzled past Jake's head as he dove for cover behind a maintenance shed. The Dragonlings scattered, their small forms darting between cover with impossible agility. "Surrender the specimens," a voice boomed through an amplifier. "You cannot escape, and continued resistance will only result in unnecessary casualties." Jake peered around the shed and saw the hegemony commander, a tall figure in black armor who stood fearlessly in the open despite the ongoing firefight. The man's arrogance reminded Jake of every bully he'd ever faced, every corrupt official who'd thought might made right. "I've got a better idea," Jake shouted back. He activated his plasma revolver's overcharge setting and put a bolt through the commander's chest plate. The man stumbled but didn't fall. Military-grade armor, probably worth more than Jake's entire settlement. But the distraction was enough. The Dragonlings reached the communication array and began to glow with that same golden light Jake had seen in the canyon. Their combined radiance was brilliant in the darkness, visible even from orbit. Jake felt the mental connection explode into something vast and overwhelming. Suddenly he was linked not just to the three creatures beside him, but to every Dragonling in the system. Dozens of minds touched his own, sharing their fear, their anger, and their determination to be free. High above, emergency alarms began wailing from the hegemony ships. "Sir, the specimens are overloading their containment fields," a voice crackled over the commander's radio. "We're losing structural integrity on decks 7 through 12. The commander's head snapped up toward the sky, then back to Jake's position. "Stop them! Kill the human if you have to, but stop them!" Hegemony troops converged on the communication array, but they were too late. The Dragonlings' combined effort had reached critical mass. Jake felt their power surge through the amplified signal, reaching across space to touch their captive kin, and the captured Dragonlings responded. The first explosion lit up the night sky like a new star. One of the hegemony cruisers erupted in flames as overloaded containment fields caused a cascade failure throughout its power grid. Secondary explosions followed as the ship's ammunition stores detonated. The other vessels began emergency maneuvers, trying to contain the damage, but the freed Dragonlings were already spreading throughout their systems. Small forms darted through corridors and maintenance shafts, their energy fields shorting out computers and weapons systems. "All ships, prepare for emergency jump," the commander shouted into his radio. "Abort the mission and retreat." But it was too late for an organized withdrawal. 2 more cruisers suffered critical failures as liberated Dragonlings tore through their infrastructure. Only 3 vessels managed to escape into hyperspace, and Jake could sense through the mental link that they carried no prisoners. The Dragonlings around the communication array collapsed from exhaustion, their glow fading to nothing. Jake caught the largest one as it fell, holding the small creature against his chest while its companions huddled nearby. "It's over," he whispered. "You did it. You saved them all." The Dragonling looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Through the fading connection, Jake felt a single overwhelming emotion, gratitude, but mixed with that gratitude was something else. Something that made Jake's heart sink. A sense of farewell, of endings and new beginnings. High above, the rescued Dragonlings were gathering in formation, their natural instincts drawing them together as they prepared to return to their ancestral nesting grounds. They would be safe now, free to rebuild their shattered communities far from human interference, and the 3 who had chosen to trust Jake would go with them. Colonel Hayes arrived with a full security detail just as the last hegemony ship disappeared into hyperspace. She took in the scene, the burning wreckage falling from orbit, the exhausted Dragonlings, and Jake kneeling beside the communication array with tears in his eyes. "Officer Morrison," she said quietly, "what's the status of the alien life forms?" Jake looked up at the sky where dozens of small forms were circling in complex patterns, their wings catching the light from the burning ships. "They're going home, Colonel. All of them. And the threat to the colony?" "Neutralized. The hegemony won't be back anytime soon, and when word of this gets out, other poachers will think twice before targeting this world." Colonel Hayes nodded, then looked down at the 3 Dragonlings who remained at Jake's side. "These ones aren't leaving with the others." It wasn't a question. Jake could feel it through the mental link, the largest Dragonling's decision to stay, to serve as a bridge between its species and humanity. The other 2 would remain as well, drawn by bonds of friendship that transcended species barriers. "No, ma'am," Jake said. "I think they've decided to stick around." The colonel smiled. "Then I suppose we'll need to revise our first contact protocols." "And Officer Morrison?" "Yes, ma'am. Welcome to the Terran Diplomatic Corps. You've just been promoted." 6 months after the hegemony attack, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Kepler 442b diplomatic station, watching ships from a dozen different species dock at the orbital platform. What had started as a simple rescue operation had somehow turned into the most significant first contact event in human history. The 3 Dragonlings who had chosen to stay with him were now full-grown, each the size of a horse, but still as gentle as house cats with humans. They had names now: Goldheart, the leader who had first trusted Jake; Stormwing, whose scales shifted from blue to silver depending on her mood; and Little Brightclaw, who despite being the smallest was also the most adventurous. "The Altarian delegation is requesting another audience," said Ambassador Chen, Jake's new diplomatic aide. The former deputy had adapted well to his new role, though he still carried his plasma pistol out of habit. "Which issue this time?" Jake asked, scratching Goldheart behind the jaw ridge where the big Dragonling liked it most. The creature purred with a sound like distant thunder. "Trade rights for rare earth minerals. They're offering advanced medical technology in exchange for exclusive mining permits in the northern wastes." Jake frowned. The Dragonlings' traditional burial grounds are in that area. I doubt they'll approve. Through his mental link with Goldheart, Jake could sense the creature's immediate distress at the mention of the sacred sites. The bond between them had grown stronger over the months, evolving from simple empathy into something approaching true telepathy. "Tell the Altarians we'll need to consult with the indigenous population first," Jake said. "Schedule a meeting for next week after I've had time to discuss it with the elders." Ambassador Chen made a note on his datapad. "Also, Admiral Harrison is requesting an update on the Dragonling Defense Corps. Earth Command wants to know when we'll have the first squadron operational." That was the part of his new job that Jake liked least. After witnessing the Dragonlings' abilities during the hegemony attack, Earth's military leaders had immediately seen their potential as living weapons. Jake had fought hard to ensure that any Dragonling participation in human defense forces would be purely voluntary, but the pressure from above never seemed to let up. "The Corps will be ready when it's ready," he said firmly. "These aren't machines we can mass produce. Each Dragonling chooses their own path." Stormwing lifted her head from where she'd been dozing in a patch of artificial sunlight. Her scales shimmered silver, a sign that she was picking up on Jake's emotional state through their shared bond. "Actually," Jake continued, "scratch that meeting with Admiral Harrison. Tell him if he wants an update, he can come here himself and ask the Dragonlings directly." Chen grinned. "That should be interesting. The Admiral's not used to being told no." "Then it's time he learned," Jake replied. He'd discovered that one of the unexpected benefits of being humanity's first xenological diplomat was that even high-ranking military officers were reluctant to argue with someone who could apparently commune with alien minds. Not that it was quite that simple. The mental bond with the Dragonlings was more like shared emotions and images than actual conversation. But Jake had learned to interpret the subtle variations in their thoughts, and they had become remarkably good at understanding human speech. "Sir," Chen said, checking his chronometer, "you have the mining consortium representatives in 20 minutes, followed by the hegemony prisoners' interrogation session." Jake's mood darkened at the mention of the prisoners. 3 hegemony operatives had been captured when their damaged ship crashed on the planet's surface, and they'd been remarkably uncooperative during questioning. The fact that they were still alive was testament to Jake's insistence on following proper legal procedures, despite Colonel Hayes's preference for more direct methods. "Any progress on getting them to talk?" "Not yet. They keep demanding to speak with their diplomatic representatives, but the hegemony claims they've never heard of them." "Convenient." Jake stood up, causing all 3 Dragonlings to raise their heads in attention. "Let's go deal with the mining consortium first. At least they're honest about wanting to strip mine our planet." The meeting with the Centauri Mining Collective went about as well as expected. 5 representatives in expensive suits sat around the conference table, speaking in careful corporate language about sustainable resource extraction and beneficial economic partnerships. What they really wanted was permission to hollow out half the planet's mountain ranges in search of rare elements. Jake listened politely while they presented their proposal, complete with holographic displays showing projected mining sites and profit margins. Goldheart lay beside his chair, occasionally lifting his head to look at the humans with obvious disapproval. "Gentlemen," Jake said when they finished their presentation, "I appreciate the thoroughness of your proposal, but I'm afraid there are some complications." The lead representative, a thin man named Bradley Walsh, leaned forward with practiced enthusiasm. "What sort of complications, Ambassador?" "I'm sure we can work out any concerns you might have. The sort where the areas you want to mine are considered sacred by the native population," Jake replied. "The Dragonlings have been burying their dead in those mountains for thousands of years." Walsh's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure we can work around a few archaeological sites. Our environmental impact teams are quite experienced in cultural preservation." Goldheart's head snapped up, and Jake felt a surge of indignation through their mental bond. The Dragonlings' scales began to shift from their usual purple-blue to a warning shade of orange. "Mr. Walsh," Jake said carefully, "perhaps I haven't been clear. This isn't a matter of working around a few sites. The entire mountain range is a cemetery. Would you be willing to strip mine Arlington National Cemetery for profit?" The corporate representatives exchanged glances. "Ambassador Morrison, with all due respect, these are alien burial grounds. Surely the needs of human expansion should take priority." That was when Goldheart decided he'd heard enough. The large Dragonling rose to his feet and walked around the table to stand directly behind Walsh's chair. He didn't make any threatening moves, but the sight of a creature the size of a Clydesdale horse positioning itself 2 feet away was enough to make the corporate executive very nervous. "Of course," Walsh said quickly, "we're always willing to consider cultural sensitivities in our operations." Jake felt Goldheart's amusement through their link, along with an image of Walsh's rapidly beating heart. Dragonlings, it seemed, had excellent hearing. "I think this meeting is over," Jake said. "The answer is no, gentlemen. Find somewhere else to dig." After the mining consortium left, rather quickly, Jake noted with satisfaction, he made his way to the detention level for the interrogation session. The hegemony prisoners had been held in comfortable but secure quarters, treated according to interstellar law despite their criminal activities. The 3 captured operatives sat in the interview room with the resigned air of professionals who knew they were caught. Their leader, a woman named Director Voss, had been running hegemony wildlife trafficking operations across 3 sectors. "Director Voss," Jake said as he entered the room, "I hope you've reconsidered our offer. Full disclosure of your operation in exchange for reduced sentences and protection from your former employers." Voss looked up with cold, gray eyes. "I told you before, human. The hegemony doesn't abandon its people. They'll negotiate for our release eventually." "Really?" "Because we've been monitoring their communications for 6 months, and they seem to have written you off as acceptable losses." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Voss's face. Jake pressed his advantage. "Face it, Director, you failed to acquire the specimens, lost 6 ships, and exposed a major trafficking operation. From their perspective, you're more valuable to them dead than alive." "You're lying." Jake activated a holographic display showing intercepted hegemony transmissions. "See for yourself. Operation Silent Wing has been officially terminated. All assets written off as combat losses. They're not coming for you." The 3 prisoners studied the data feeds with growing comprehension. Jake could see the moment when they realized the truth. They were expendable, and their organization had already moved on without them. "What do you want?" Voss asked quietly. "The locations of your other operations, species you've targeted, buyers you've sold to, routes you've used, everything." "In exchange for what?" "Relocation to a non-extradition world under assumed identities. A chance to start over without looking over your shoulders for the rest of your lives." Voss was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "I want the deal in writing. Signed by your colonial authority and the Terran Diplomatic Corps." "Done." 2 hours later, Jake had enough intelligence to cripple hegemony wildlife trafficking operations across the entire sector. More importantly, he had the locations of 17 other worlds where rare species were being hunted to extinction. As he walked back to his office, Brightclaw suddenly appeared beside him, having somehow slipped past 3 security checkpoints without anyone noticing. The young Dragonling had developed an alarming talent for getting into places she shouldn't be. "Where have you been?" Jake asked, scratching the creature's head. Through their mental link, he caught flashes of images, ventilation shafts, computer terminals, and startled technicians. Brightclaw chirped innocently and rubbed against his leg. Jake sighed. "Please tell me you didn't hack into the station's mainframe again." The Dragonlings' mental response was pure innocence, but Jake had learned not to trust that particular expression. He made a mental note to have the IT department check their security protocols. When he reached his office, Ambassador Chen was waiting with an urgent message from Earth Command. "Sir, we've got a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting a large fleet moving toward this system. Configuration unknown, but they're big enough to show up at maximum scan range." Jake felt his 3 Dragonling companions tense as they picked up on his emotional state. Through their shared bond, he could sense their readiness for action, their willingness to defend their adopted home. "How long until they arrive?" 12 hours. Maybe less if they're pushing their engines. Jake thought about the intelligence he'd just extracted from the hegemony prisoners. 17 worlds, dozens of endangered species, and an organization with apparently unlimited resources and no concern for interstellar law. "Get me a channel to Admiral Harrison," he said, "and send a priority message to the Dragonling communities in the mountains. Tell them we might need their help." Chen activated the communication array. "Sir, what if this isn't the hegemony? What if it's something else entirely?" Jake looked out the viewport at the peaceful blue-green world below, where human colonists and Dragonlings were learning to build something new together. Whatever was coming, they would face it as they had faced everything else. Together. "Then we'll deal with it," he said simply. "That's what diplomats do." Goldheart moved to stand beside him at the viewport, the great Dragonling's presence both comforting and protective. Through their bond, Jake felt the creature's absolute certainty. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them as partners. And in the mountains below, ancient voices began to sing, calling the scattered clans home to defend the world they shared with their human friends. The real adventure was just beginning. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on the communication screen 12 minutes later, his expression grim. "Morrison, I'm reading 37 ships on long-range sensors. That's not a hegemony fleet, it's something much bigger." "What do we know about their configuration?" Jake asked. "Mixed fleet, multiple species. Some of the signatures match ships we've encountered before, but others are completely unknown. The good news is they're not moving in attack formation. And the bad news? They're heading straight for us, and they've got enough firepower to reduce this system to asteroids if they're hostile." Jake felt Stormwing and Brightclaw move to flank him as Goldheart's mental presence strengthened their shared bond. Whatever was coming, the Dragonlings were ready to fight. "Admiral, I need you to trust me on this. Position your ships for defense, but don't take any aggressive action. If this is what I think it is, opening fire could start a war that spans half the galaxy." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "What exactly do you think it is?" Jake looked down at the data pad containing the intelligence from Director Voss. 17 worlds, dozens of species, all victims of the same criminal organization. And now, apparently, they had decided to do something about it. "I think it's the cavalry, Admiral, and they've come to join the fight."